Hello, PJ Roscoe here, and I'm the author of Between Worlds, a psychological paranormal thriller. And I'm going to read you the first chapter. Chapter 1. Emily, Emily, my lovely, come on, you lazy thing. Wake up and hear the birds sing. I heard the words drift into my dream, but I was warm and didn't want to open my eyes. I was safe and away from the nightmare that was my life, if I kept my eyes tightly shut. However, the insistent rocking back and forth, accompanied by the unrelenting singing of my name over and over, forced me to crack open one eye and glare as best as I could at my roommate. "There you are, sleepyhead! Come on, Emily, get out of that bed. It's time to eat and breakfast is ready, so come on, Emily, ready and steady." I should probably have pointed out at this stage that my roommate had a dependency to speak in rhyme. Much to mine and everyone else's annoyance, it was apparently her only coping mechanism, though I had no concept of how rhyming words helped her cope with her trauma. Come on, it's a beautiful day! Hip, hip, hooray!" "Oh, fuck off!" I snarled, and pulled the covers back over my head. Sadly for me, Mary, who'd always been nice to me, was passing the open doorway at the time. "Emily, are you not up yet? Are you feeling okay, child?" I heard her soft footsteps approach my bed, and with a loud sigh I peeped out from under the covers. "Sorry, no, just getting up, if Jane would leave me alone for a moment." Hearing my hint, Jane clutched her arms around herself and drifted off into the corridor. Oh my, it's time to fly." I sighed again and caught Mary's eye. She was one of the kind nurses, and although I was 26, she still called me child, as she did everyone else. I liked it. It made me feel loved. And I told her once, not long after arriving. "Oh, I am glad," she'd said, "because to me you're someone I'll strive to protect and care for, as if you were my own. But don't tell the other nurses. They don't like us getting too close. Do you know what I mean?" She'd winked at me then and given me a friendly nudge. Now Mary looked down at me with concern and just a hint of disgust at hearing my choice of language. I immediately felt contrite. "Oh, I'm sorry for my language, Mary. Jane was annoying me." "Oh, I see. Being woken isn't pleasant, but let's consider our language in future. Now, if you please, Emily, good dream, was it?" I nodded, but found I couldn't form the words to describe my adventure. I could feel the dream drifting away, and knew that soon I'd have forgotten it. I felt a strange sadness at the thought, as if I needed to keep hold of how it had made me feel, like it was important somehow. However, it was already fading. "Well, you know the rules, child. Time to get up and have something to eat. The canteen closes in half an hour. They have that yogurt you like. I saw it this morning." I smiled and pushed myself into a seated position and yawned. "Okay, I'm up. I'll do anything for one of those yogurts. You know me so well, Mary." Smiling, she left the room, and the happiness left with her. I gazed out at the empty corridor, feeling the terror return with the dreary prospect of suffering another day in that hellhole. I swallowed hard and licked my lips as I forced down the urge to scream and shout at the injustice. After some deep breathing, I felt able to get out of bed and visit the bathroom. Washed and with golden brown hair brushed and tied back, I dressed in jeans and an Alice Cooper t-shirt. My slippers finished my ensemble and followed the nauseating aroma of fried food. After my small breakfast of yogurt and red berries, a large mug of stewed tea and a piece of Galaxy chocolate given to me by a fellow inmate, I wandered back down the corridor towards the common room. Today was my turn with the psychiatrist, Dr. Marion Griffiths, and I had half an hour to kill before my appointment. However, because they didn't like us going back to our own rooms, we had to congregate in various places to keep the staff happy. Upon entering the large room, I was surprised to see it empty. It was rare to find anywhere in this place unoccupied, even for a moment. Always someone drooling, crying, or wandering aimlessly around the room, all because of their meds, or merely sitting and staring off into space, lost in their own little worlds. That in itself wasn't so bad, considering the scenarios I'd witnessed since my arrival nearly 3 months before. Still, another person invading my space annoyed me, when all I wanted was to be alone with my thoughts. I wandered over to one of the large oval windows that lit the room with morning sunshine and closed my eyes against the warm glare. I didn't need to see outside to appreciate what lay before me. Central was a perfectly mowed lawn that stretched out for about an acre. West of the lawn was a waist-high bush of blooming rhododendrons, while on the east a perfectly cut hedge of lavender and rosemary. Planted close together, there were no gaps between the herbs, and the scent exquisite as you passed by. Along the bottom of the lawn stood the 10-foot-high brick wall, made to look pretty with red and pink roses creeping up and over. The old hall had been built in the early 19th century for some rich person who died without having children. Apparently his wife had suffered from depression and hallucinations, and as he couldn't bear to see her go into some insane asylum, he turned his own home into one. On her death years later, still screaming about the visitors, he'd handed the hall over to the local authorities before dying himself of cancer. All in all, the place was dripping with irony. I'd read the brief history in some pamphlet left lying around the ward and asked if anyone knew who those visitors were. No one had given my question the time of day, fobbing me off with some incoherent answer. I'd not asked again. I had my own theories anyway. I was convinced that the place was truly haunted. I mean, it was the perfect setting, wasn't it? An old hall, lots of tragic history, and now a home for the sick and insane. So much negative energy must have conjured up the presence of some kind of spirit. It simply lurked in the eerie air and clung to you like a heavy woolen winter coat. Besides, I'd heard strange noises in the night. Footsteps were normal, as were groans, moans, screams, and profanities. But there were footsteps that echoed, and they were loud, as if a giant were roaming the hallway. "What you doing?" I sighed loudly, opened my eyes, and looked at the younger woman staring at me with intense interest. "Mia, what does it look like I'm doing? I'm leaving this place in my head." Excited, she nodded and hugged her raggedy doll tighter to her small chest. "Oh, okay. Well, come back soon." I smiled. "I will. But first I have to go see the doc. Are you all right?" Mia chewed on her inner cheek for a moment and rocked herself before leaning forward as another inmate shuffled in. "No, not really. My baby won't wake up and they're blaming me. Again." "Ah, I see." And I did, of course, as Mia told me the same whenever we met, which was most days. Her doll clutched to her bosom, and the sheer sadness and grief of what she had done etched into her face. "Well, maybe she will soon. I'll see you later, Mia. Goodbye." Picking up her doll's hand, she made it wave at me before shuffling off into her favourite corner of the room, where she'd made a little den of the chairs to play house with her baby. The nurses would encourage Mia to put the chairs back, but after a few minutes she'd make another den and it would begin all over again. I'd been horrified the first time I heard the reason for her incarceration. Age 17, she'd become pregnant after a gang rape of 4 boys, aged between 15 and 19, who'd done it as a dare. Mia had been considered a little slow by the children and adults in her village, and nobody believed her until the evidence of that night became clear. Her father owned a farm, and on seeing her swollen belly, had taken a shotgun and found the boys one by one, blowing off their weapons and leaving them to bleed to death. One boy survived, but he'll never rape another woman again. Afterwards, Mia's father turned the gun on himself, leaving Mia and her mother to cope with the aftermath of his actions and the consequences of the attack. 5 months later, Mia gave birth to a healthy boy. Her mother left the room for a few minutes to visit the bathroom. On returning, she found Mia alone, calmly sitting up in bed holding a raggedy doll to her breast. The hospital staff searched high and low for the child, eventually finding his tiny, broken body in the bushes beneath Mia's window, 10 stories up. She'd flung him away like garbage. I watched her for a moment as she began to turn the chairs to make her little den that would help her feel safe for just a short while. The horror of what she'd done 3 years ago was not evident on her face, as it hadn't been the night she killed her baby. She'd never admitted it or shown remorse for her actions, but had merely slipped away into her own safe world and not returned. The evil of men had brought her to this. Despite her action, Mia was an innocent. Yet it felt like nobody had considered that. If the boys hadn't attacked her, she wouldn't have been pregnant. Though Mia's father had dealt out the justice, the boys' parents demanded her incarceration for life because the death penalty was not allowed in Britain anymore. Personally, I wish it had been, for rapists too, as well as murderers. Would those parents have still wanted it then, if Mia's father hadn't provided his own? I doubted it. Movement near the doorway caught my eye, and I turned to find one of the nurses watching me. One of the newer ones who still wasn't sure if this was the job she really wanted, and always became anxious if a patient espied her. This one nurse would quickly glance around to check where the other nurses were in case we mad bastards lunged at her. "You have an appointment this morning with Dr. Griffiths in 10 minutes. I continued to stare at her. "I know." I couldn't keep the contempt at being reminded out of my voice, and I saw the flicker of fear on her face. Right, okay then." I watched and smiled as she quickly left the room, and then I let out a long breath to try and help relax my shoulders. It felt like I had a permanent knot in them, and my neck was sometimes so rigid from tension it hurt my head. I gently rolled my shoulders and gazed out of the window. I could hear Mia mumbling to her doll in the far corner, a sound of surreal sweetness that comforted me. It was a few minutes' walk to Dr. Griffith's office, and I wasn't in any rush.